Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys checking out today's video and spending some time with me, because today, guys, we're going to be talking about the key areas in your lake to catch bass in the wintertime. This is a specialty deal. There's certain areas that bass live in the winter time of the year that they don't live any other time of year. And there's a lot to it, man. There's a lot to locating bass because they literally use so many different water depths. They suspend, they're on the bottom, depending upon a lot of different factors. They're all over the place. So I sort of want to go over and give you guys some tips and advice on about probably a half a dozen key type structures in the lake that you fish that bass live on in the wintertime. So give you guys some good success the next time you're out there when the fishing's cold. Also, guys, just a quick invitation to please swing by and check out my Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns that I build for Fish the Moment. We got maps for all 4 seasons right now, guys: winter, spring, summer, fall. These are maps I build specifically for Fish the Moment for all the big lakes across the country, most all the lakes across the country. Really good resources to learn more about your favorite lakes. So I'll put the link in the description if you guys are interested in that. So also, guys, please hit that subscribe button here to Advanced Bass Fishing if you like the content. So much appreciated putting up with the plugs there. Okay, I do a lot of fishing in the wintertime. You know, I do a lot of my on-the-water lessons here at Table Rock Lake and Stockton Lake in Missouri. And since I grew up here in the Ozarks, clear water environment, it's more conducive to colder water fishing. This is sort of the home of jerkbait fishing in the Ozarks here. So I've done a lot of winter fishing and a lot of cold water fishing, and I've learned a lot about it, man. I've learned a lot about not only fishing in the wintertime here in Missouri, but for fishing all over the country, you know, during cold months of the year. So I sort of want to lay out here what I look for in the lakes I go to, the areas I go to find those winter bass. And I want to sort of keep this to man-made impoundments. Now, we could talk about grass lakes in the wintertime, but that's a completely different animal. So I want to talk about the typical man-made reservoir that most people fish across the country from coast to coast. Okay, here's what I look for when I go fishing. The first structure that I look for in the wintertime, which is one of the most consistent producers, are main lake and secondary points. Now, main lake and secondary points are good structures all year long, but especially in the wintertime because they offer a diversity of options for the bass. One thing you have to determine about winter fishing, or have to realize about winter fishing, a lot of it depends on the water clarity and the water temperature. And for most part, when I talk about cold water wintertime fishing, I'm talking about water temperatures in the 40s to the low 50s. And I don't do much fishing on any lake unless it has at least about 2.5 foot of visibility. I don't consider lakes that have less than 2.5 foot of visibility to be good winter lakes unless the water temperature stays over 50. So we're going to assume in this particular video that the areas you're fishing have water temperatures in that range I talked about and water clarity of over 2 feet. Okay, now secondary and main lake points, they're really good places to find fish because in the wintertime, bass can use different depths on that point depending upon the water clarity. I've caught bass as shallow as 4 or 5 foot in the wintertime, and I've caught them as deep as like 60 feet in the wintertime. Normally, the cleaner the water, the deeper going to be. And also those fish on the points, they can be on the bottom or they can suspend on those points and just hang around the bait fish that are suspended out over deeper water. So points are an excellent place to look for bass right off the bat in the wintertime. And again, your technique that you fish on a point, again, depends on your water clarity and your water temperature, how deep those fish are. So, you know, without getting into that, I just want to talk in this video about the places to catch fish on rather than the technique. But your secondary and main lake points are going to be key structures in the wintertime on any lake. Next structure, guys, are bluffs. Now, these bluffs can be located in the creek arms or on the main lake. Another reason bluffs are good in the winter time of the year is they have immediate access to deep water, especially if you got a channel next to it. So bluffs are great places to fish in the wintertime. One of my favorite ways to catch them in the wintertime on a bluff is fishing like a jig real slow along those rocky banks. And a bluff, those fish can be it's the same way as like on the points. Those fish can be deep on the bottom on those bluffs, or they can be suspended out off the bluffs a little bit too, especially if you have submergent timber. Any time that you have submergent timber in a lake, there's going to be a lot more suspended fish that are using that water. Now, sort of along with a bluff bank, the next type of areas I like are some type of a channel bank. Now, bluff banks can be vertical walls or they can be broken rock, but channel banks can be a lot of different sizes of rock, but you get a channel bank is sort of like a bluff in the fact that you got some deep water next to it. Bass use channel banks much in the same way as they use bluff banks. The exception that I would put on the two is the bluff bank is probably better in the really cold water and the really cold weather, and the channel banks tend to be a little bit better if your water temperatures are closer to 50. But bass will move up and down those bluff banks and channel banks all year long. And a lot of times what you have bluff banks that actually transition into a channel bank. So don't ever overlook that. Rock transitions along those areas are going to be really good too. Next type of area, guys, is what I call ditches or the middle of coves. Now, this is a really good technique if you fish a lake that has blueback herring in it, although it will work in a shad lake, and it's pretty easy to do. What I like to look for in that is I'll go on the lower end of the lake where the water's clear, and I go back into some of the major coves off of the main lake, and I go about 2/3 of the way back in there, and I get right in the middle of the cove, and I start looking, at my electronics, my 2D sonar, when the water depth gets around 35 or 40 feet deep. And if I see any evidence of like bait fish or fish, I just cast right down the middle of that cove, and I work from about 2/3 of the way back in the cove, not all the way back in, but 100 yards or so, as long as that water depth stays over about 15 or 20 foot. And I'll cast things like underspins in there, jerk baits, Alabama rigs, but a lot of times those fish will set up in those ditches, or some people call them guts, but it's basically just the middle of the coves. A lot of times fish will live in that type of deal. The next one, guys, is just out in the open water in the middle of the major creek arms, about 2/3 of the way back in there. Now, this is the type of areas that people target with the cheater box, but you don't have to have that. The only thing that you have to do is I like to get back in those major creek arms about 2/3 of the way back in there, and I start looking when that water depth is about 40 to 45 feet deep. And what I do is I just idle around in the middle of that creek out there, and I look for any bait fish. And the bait fish is going to tell me the depth that the fish are at. And most of the time in those creek arms, those bait fish are going to be deep. And it's a really good place like to fish a spoon. Like if you see some bait fish deep in the middle of those creeks, pitch a spoon out there, drop shot, something like that. A little Demiki rig can be good. And this is especially good if you have submergent timber. If you have some lakes that have old, broken timber, underwater in the middle of those creeks, a lot of those fish will suspend at the top of that timber in the middle of those creeks. It can be really, really good. A couple other things that I look for in the winter time of the year is you have the areas of the lake can be good depending upon your water clarity. Now, normally you have a couple different bites in a lake. You got your clear water, lower end fish that has, those fish live in that clear water. And then also in the winter time of the year, you have a percentage of the fish that will live in the upper end of the lake, like in the upper river part. Another sort of an off-the-wall deal that I like to do in the wintertime is I'll go up in the major river arms. If there's a river arm leading into the lake, and I'll go quite a ways up that river, and I'll get on those steep rocky banks that are way up the river. Now, normally what you have up there, you've got a little bit more off-colored water, you've got a lot of rock, and there's a population of fish, even in the wintertime, that will live shallower on those rocky banks on the upper end of the lake. So one of the things I like to do if that water temperature is anywhere close to 50 degrees is I'll take like a wigglewort or a rock crawler or maybe a jig, and I'll fish those rocky banks in that little bit more off-colored water, a little bit shallower than you'd be fishing down on the lower end. I'll target that 5 to 8 foot zone. I've caught a lot of fish doing that as well. So anyway, guys, that's just some of the key structures. That's what I look for in most any lake is bluffs, secondary and main lake points, channel banks, ditches and guts, middles of coves, rocky banks. All that stuff can be pretty good. So hope it helps out. We'll talk later.